gates, bridges, and the world of medieval tolls. In medieval Europe, travel was rarely free. Roads and bridges, markets and rivers, all were dotted with points where travelers had to stop, declare their goods, and pay a fee. At the heart of these stops stood the toll collector, a figure as weary, distrusted, and necessary as the miller or the taxman. His life was one of monotony and suspicion, bound to a wooden booth or a stone gatehouse, endlessly recording payments and arguments. To begin this story, we must first step into his daily world, the toll house, the long hours of waiting, and the unglamorous rhythm of collecting coins and tokens from travelers who rarely welcomed his presence. The landscape of tolls. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe's growing economy meant that roads, bridges, and markets bustled with movement. But infrastructure cost money. Lords, kings, bishops, and towns all sought to fund bridges, maintain roads, or simply profit from the flow of trade. The result was a patchwork of tolls, each with its own rules. Travelers crossing a bridge might pay a toll. Merchants entering a town to sell goods paid another. Barges on rivers faced fees at checkpoints. Sometimes tolls funded rail improvements, like bridge maintenance. Other times, they were little more than rents extracted by whoever controlled the land. At every one of these points, a toll collector sat, waiting for travelers to stop. The toll house. Imagine a small stone gatehouse by a bridge. Smoke curls from a chimney. Inside, the toll collector sits at a rough wooden table, quill, inkwell, and tally sticks at hand. A brazier glows weakly in winter, but drafts whistle through cracks. The collector's world is narrow. The creak of carts, the mutter of travelers, the endless clink of coins. The toll house is not grand. It is cramped, dusty, and often cold. Walls are covered with parchments listing rates. So much for a cart of hay, so much for a herd of pigs, so much for a sack of salt. Each day, the collector watches the stream of humanity pass by. Farmers, merchants, pilgrims, soldiers. Each must stop, pay, and grumble. The collector's tools. The toll collector's main tools were simple but symbolic. Scales to weigh coins or goods, ensuring fair payment and inviting suspicion. Tally sticks, marked with notches to record payments. Parchment registers, written in cramped script, noting who passed and what they paid. A coffer or chest to store coins, locked with iron bands. Each tool embodied the tedious accuracy expected of his trade. Mistakes could bring punishment from his lord or town council. Yet accuracy was hard, as disputes over weights, measures, and exemptions were constant. A day in the life. At dawn, the toll collector opened his booth. The first carts creaked across the bridge, wheels rumbling on planks. He checked their loads, sacks of grain, barrels of ale, bundles of cloth, and calculated the fee. A farmer might complain, "This bridge is older than I am. Why must I pay for its upkeep?" The collector, unmoved, pointed to the posted rates. Coins clinked into the chest. The hours blurred into repetition. A merchant arrived with donkeys laden with salt. A shepherd drove sheep across, each counted at the gate. A group of pilgrims begged exemption, claiming piety. Sometimes exemptions were genuine, granted by charter. Sometimes they were false, leaving the collector to argue or yield. By evening, his eyes were tired, his ledger filled with cramped entries, his chest heavy with coins. Yet he had little sense of profit. Most revenue went straight to his lord or employer. His role was to endure the traveler's anger, collect the dues, and pass them on. Suspicion and resentment. Like the miller, the toll collector was rarely loved. Travelers resented him as an obstacle on their journey. Merchants cursed the delays. Peasants muttered that tolls were unfair. Bandits despised tolls as interference with smuggling. Collectors were often accused of dishonesty, pocketing coins, overcharging strangers, or favoring locals. Some indeed cheated, skimming from payments or misreporting figures. Others, honest but unlucky, were still distrusted. Their reputation was shaped less by their character and more by their role as visible agents of authority. The toll collector's status. Despite the resentment, toll collectors were not peasants. They often lived slightly better, their wages secured by steady income from tolls. Some were minor officials of the lord or town, literate enough to keep records. Others were common men hired to do a thankless job. Their status was ambiguous. They had authority over travelers, but little power beyond their booth. They might be mocked in taverns, but feared at gates. They occupied a narrow social role, necessary, disliked, but inescapable. The collector's family. If the miller's home was dusty with flour, the toll collector's house smelled of smoke and coins. His family often lived in the toll house itself, sharing the cramped quarters. His wife might cook in the corner hearth, while children helped count livestock or carry notch tally sticks. The family shared his reputation. Wives of toll collectors were mocked as greedy, children teased as coin counters. Yet they too depended on the endless stream of travelers for survival. The rhythm of boredom. The collector's greatest companion was boredom. He sat for hours between travelers, staring at the same bridge or gate. In winter, he shivered by the brazier. In summer, he swatted flies. His work lacked variety. The same questions, the same disputes, the same coins. Only rare excitement, like a caravan of foreign merchants or a troop of soldiers, broke the monotony. Yet boredom was also security. A day with few disputes meant safety. A day with steady payments meant survival. His life was one of dull repetition, but repetition was the essence of his trade. The toll collector's booth, perched on a bridge or beside a market gate, was a place of monotony and suspicion. He was needed but disliked, endured but mocked. His life was shaped by endless repetition, counting coins, writing entries, hearing complaints. But this was only part of the story. Behind his daily grind lay a deeper system of power and profit. Who set the tolls? Who received the revenue? How did these charges shape trade, travel, and resentment across medieval Europe? Lords, towns, and the politics of tolls. In the first section, we stood with the toll collector in his cramped booth, watching the endless stream of travelers stop, complain, and pay. Now, we step back to see the larger machinery that made tolls a permanent feature of medieval life. Behind each weary collector stood a lord, a bishop, or a town council. Each toll was part of a broader economy of rights, charters, and power. The toll collector was merely the face of a system far larger than himself. The right to levy tolls. In medieval Europe, the right to impose tolls was rarely questioned in principle. Lords and kings claimed it as part of their authority, while towns justified it as payment for maintenance of roads, bridges, and markets. But the ownership of toll rights was complex. Lords and bishops. A noble who built a bridge or controlled a road often asserted the right to levy tolls. Bishops and abbots claimed tolls on church lands, arguing that revenues supported the upkeep of bridges or the funding of religious houses. Kings and princes. Monarchs frequently issued charters granting toll rights. These charters might confirm an existing right or transfer it to a loyal subject. Kings also demanded tolls on major roads or rivers under royal authority. Towns. Growing urban centers asserted their own tolls, claiming revenue to maintain walls, gates, and marketplaces. Town councils debated rates, posted rules, and employed collectors. This patchwork of authority produced a confusing map of toll points. A merchant traveling from one region to another might pay dozens of tolls along the way. The economics of tolls. The economics behind tolls were straightforward. They provided revenue. Lords used tolls to fund castles, courts, or personal luxuries. Towns used them to repair walls, pave streets, or finance militias. Monasteries used tolls to sustain their religious work. But for merchants and travelers, the costs were burdensome. Toll rates might vary wildly, from modest fees for a sack of grain to exorbitant charges on imported goods. Some tolls were reasonable, covering maintenance costs. Others were exploitative, functioning as little more than legalized extortion. The economic tension was constant. Lords and towns sought to maximize revenue. Merchants lobbied for exemptions or protested excessive fees. The web of charters and exemptions. Charters created a labyrinth of exemptions. Kings often granted privileges to monasteries, towns, or individuals, allowing them to pass tolls without payment. These exemptions were written into documents, sealed with wax, and carried on journeys as proof. For toll collectors, exemptions created endless disputes. A traveler might present a charter claiming exemption. The collector, often illiterate, had to decide whether it was genuine. Some exemptions were centuries old, copied and recopied until they were barely legible. Forgeries were common. Arguments ensued, with collectors caught between obeying their lord's orders and avoiding accusations of denying a rightful privilege. The politics of resentment. Because tolls affected everyone who traveled, they became a source of constant resentment. Merchants saw them as obstacles to trade. Pilgrims felt that charging them was impious. Peasants resented paying tolls to cross bridges that were poorly maintained. At times, resentment boiled over. Riots broke out in towns when tolls were raised. Merchants refused to travel certain routes. bankrupting toll stations. In some cases, kings intervened, abolishing tolls seen as unjust, or, more cynically, abolishing rival tolls while maintaining their own. Evil tolls and reform. Some tolls became notorious as malai consuetudines, evil customs. These were tolls widely regarded as abusive, either for their excessive rates or for their illegality. Chroniclers complained of toll stations where travelers were robbed under the guise of law. Merchants' guilds petitioned rulers for their abolition. In response, reformers occasionally sought to standardize tolls. Kings issued decrees listing fare rates. Town leagues negotiated agreements to reduce tolls on trade routes. Yet enforcement was difficult. Local lords clung fiercely to their rights, and collectors carried on as before. Tolls and warfare. Tolls also played a role in warfare. A lord at war with his neighbor might seize toll stations along rivers or roads, cutting off trade. Kings used toll revenues to fund armies. After conquests, victorious rulers often imposed new tolls on captured lands. Travelers were caught in the middle. A merchant's goods might be taxed twice, once by his own ruler, once by the enemy. Tolls thus became both an economic burden and a weapon of power. The collector as agent of power. In this system, the toll collector was merely an agent. He sat at the gatehouse, but behind him stood layers of authority. He collected coins not for himself, but for his employer, lord, town, or king. Yet to the traveler, he was the visible face of power. The grumbles aimed at him were really aimed at the system he represented. Collectors sometimes exploited this ambiguity. They might pocket extra coins, blaming higher-ups, or they might sympathize with travelers, allowing them through at reduced rates. In either case, their role was precarious. Too lenient, and they angered their masters. Too harsh, and they provoked villagers and merchants. The toll road is symbol. The toll road, dotted with collectors' booths, became a symbol of medieval life. It represented the fragmented nature of authority, each lord claiming his slice of the road, each town asserting its rights, each merchant forced to pay. It also represented the endurance of daily life, as travelers carried on despite the delays and costs. The system was inefficient, frustrating, and resented. Yet it endured for centuries, shaping the rhythms of trade and travel. In this section, we have seen that tolls were not merely the work of weary collectors. They were the revenue streams of lords, towns, and kings, the subjects of charters and disputes, the causes of resentment and reform. They were the visible sign of medieval authority, both petty and powerful. But what happened in the long run? Did tolls fade away with time, or did they leave a lasting mark on European trade and governance? And what became of the toll collectors themselves as roads and economies changed? The decline, transformation, and legacy of tolls. We have sat in the toll collector's booth and listened to the grumbles of peasants and merchants. We have stepped back to see how lords, bishops, and towns turned tolls into a web of charters and revenues. Now, in this final section, we follow tolls into their later history, their decline, transformation, and legacy. For while medieval tolls faded, the system of collecting dues at gates and roads left behind deep marks on Europe's economic life. The burden of tolls in late medieval Europe. By the 14th and 15th centuries, tolls had multiplied to the point of absurdity. Merchants traveling long routes might face dozens of stops. In the Holy Roman Empire, fragmented into hundreds of lordships, toll stations lined rivers and roads at short intervals. Barges on the Rhine paid fees at nearly every bend, enriching local lords but frustrating trade. Merchants adapted, but the costs were high. Tolls drove up prices, discouraged long-distance trade, and pushed traders to form leagues and associations. The very success of commerce made tolls both more profitable for rulers and more hated by those who paid them. Resistance and reform. Resentment sometimes turned into open resistance. Merchant leagues, such as the Hanseatic League, used their collective power to demand reductions or abolitions of tolls. They negotiated treaties with princes and towns to secure freer passage. At times, they used force, attacking toll stations they deemed unjust. Kings, too, sought reform. Ambitious monarchs in France and England, seeking stronger centralized states, began abolishing local tolls or absorbing them into royal control. They argued that too many tolls harmed the common good of trade. Royal proclamations promised standardized rates and fewer stops. Yet reforms were uneven. Local lords resisted fiercely, guarding their revenues. Many evil tolls endured until strong monarchies or powerful towns could eliminate them. The decline of manorial tolls. As feudalism waned in the late Middle Ages, manorial tolls declined. Lords lost much of their authority to enforce payments, especially as peasants gained more freedom. Some toll stations fell into disuse, their booths abandoned, their collectors unemployed. Others survived in reduced form, absorbed into town or royal systems. The toll collector, once the weary face of lordly power, now often worked for towns or kings. His booth still stood by bridges or gates, but his employer had changed. The rise of customs and state revenues. By the early modern period, tolls merged into customs duties. Instead of dozens of small tolls along a road, states sought to impose centralized customs at borders or major cities. This was more efficient and less resented, though still burdensome. The old toll collector became, in effect, a customs officer. He still weighed goods, recorded payments, and argued with travelers, but now in the service of a growing state rather than a feudal lord. His booth was more formal, his records more standardized, his role more secure. The symbol of the toll. Even as tolls transformed, the toll collector remained a symbol of frustration. Literature and folklore continued to mock him as petty, greedy, or obstructive. The toll road became shorthand for unnecessary obstacles, just as the mill had symbolized exploitation. Travelers told tales of collectors who pocketed coins, argued endlessly, or delayed journeys. These tales lived on, long after the specific toll stations had vanished, as memories of the irritations of medieval travel. The collector's long day ends. For the toll collector himself, The decline of local tolls meant the end of his traditional role. Some adapted, entering service with towns or states as customs officers. Others lost their livelihoods entirely as booths closed and bridges became free. His long day, spent hunched in a cold booth with tally sticks and coins, was over. Yet the image endured. The weary man at the gate, the clink of coins, the mutter of travelers. His monotony became part of Europe's memory of medieval life. The legacy of tolls. Tolls left behind more than resentment. They helped shape the infrastructure of Europe. Bridges were built and maintained with toll revenues. Town walls were repaired, markets sustained, and roads improved. Even exploitative tolls contributed, indirectly, to the development of commerce by forcing merchants to organize and negotiate collectively. More importantly, tolls laid the groundwork for modern taxation systems. The bureaucratic habit of recording goods, counting coins, and issuing receipts became the basis for customs and excise duties in early modern states. The toll collector's ledger was the ancestor of the customs office. Why it sucked to be a toll collector? To be a medieval toll collector was to endure suspicion, boredom, and resentment. It sucked because the work was monotonous. The booth was cold and cramped, and every traveler saw you as an obstacle. You represented authority, but enjoyed little power yourself. You handled coins all day, but rarely kept much. You were mocked in taverns, distrusted by villagers, and scrutinized by lords. And yet, your dull work mattered. You funded bridges, towns, and even armies. You helped sustain rulers, monasteries, and markets. Your boredom was the revenue of the realm.